March 2009. The city of Tracy in California. Home to Sandra Cantu, who had just turned 8 years old. She lived with her mother Maria and her 3 older siblings Miranda, Simone, and Thomas. Maria and Sandra's dad Daniel had been separated for a long time. He lived quite far out, but the kids still spoke to him on the phone most days and had a good relationship with him. Her brother Thomas said Sandra never stopped moving. Her energy was endless. She loved helping her mother with the baking and her grandparents with the gardening. She enjoyed gymnastics and dancing, and more often than not you could find her outside playing. She had no problem knocking on doors and introducing herself to make new friends, but even if no one could come out to play, she was more than happy to make up her own games and entertain herself. Thomas said she was so young and still had a real innocence to her, never letting things bother her and moving on quickly if she ever felt sad. Although school for some children can be a big transition and quite a scary change, Sandra couldn't get there quick enough in the mornings and would bounce home every day ready to tell everybody what she had done. Thomas said she was, put simply, a carefree, playful, and happy young girl. March 27, 2009 was just your typical working and school day for everyone in Tracy. Just after 2 p.m. Sandra was back at home and ready to fill everybody in on her day. She put her bag inside and then ran back out as she saw her brother coming home too. The family lived in the Orchard Estates mobile home park, home to about 100 people, right next to a little park. The ever-energetic 8-year-old wasn't one to just sit indoors. She wanted to be out playing with her friends before dinner. All the neighboring children were out a lot, so Maria was happy to let her play and call her back in when dinner was ready, the same as she did almost every day. Thomas said Sandra was going through a big Hello Kitty phase, and she changed into her favorite Hello Kitty top and some black leggings before hugging her mother and running outside. A few hours later, Maria asked Thomas to shout his sisters in for food. Miranda, who was playing nearby, came over right away, but Sandra didn't. It was now getting darker, and thinking she was playing a game, maybe hide and seek. He searched for about another 20 minutes or so, but she was nowhere. Maria and Simone got into the car and drove around asking the neighbors, but no one had seen her in hours. At 7:30 p.m. Maria called 911, and this was now a missing persons case. This was already considered very serious because of her age, and detectives quickly brought in dogs to smell Sandra's clothes and see if they could obtain a scent outside. The police dogs led officers straight out of the park and onto the main road, but after this the trail went cold. Detectives in the park took a picture of Sandra door to door, but no photo was needed. Absolutely everyone knew who she was, and as worried as they all were that she was missing, no one had any information. One agent said that the amount of people living in the park who had very serious past convictions was alarmingly quite a lot. Everyone from sex offenders living close to Sandra, to an ice cream truck driver that the neighbors found so creepy with their children they had taken to chasing him off when he came by. While they got to work asking questions, Sandra's grandfather Joe said they could have a look at his cameras, which he had only very recently installed after a break-in. His cameras showed Sandra leaving the house just as Maria had said, heading off to play. She soon came back, skipping across the road, seeming happy, and it looked as if she was heading back to her house. But instead of going up the steps, she turned around and started walking off down the street, which was heading for one of the exits. There was no more footage of her on the tapes. She did not once come back into view. She had to have left the park, but she knew not to go out unless it was with her family or a trusted adult. So seeing her head that way made police think something or someone she knew had caught her attention. Sandra hadn't physically seen her father Daniel in a long time, and police learned that he and Maria were involved in a financial dispute linked to custody. Maria assured detectives that he would never have anything to do with this. Despite their issues as exes, he still had a great relationship with Sandra and she adored him. The media were focused quite heavily on Daniel, and everyone was scrambling to get an interview with him. Daniel lived way out of town, and his colleagues could account for him working over that weekend. Detectives were happy that he had nothing to do with his daughter's disappearance. 48 hours later, and investigators had now had over 700 leads to follow. They said to their relief, none of them indicated Sandra was dead. Young girls matching her description had been seen all over the place. We've had sightings from people all over California saying they've seen her, which would definitely suggest that she is still alive. Statistics show that she's probably still in Tracy. But if we get a tip in Nevada or in Southern California, wherever we get a tip, we are going to go, one officer said. But time was ticking by and the local authorities needed more resources. They enlisted the help of CARD, which stands for Child Abduction Rapid Deployment, and this team is part of the FBI. The first few hours of a child going missing is absolutely crucial, but no one knew how long she had actually been missing for. There had been several hours that had passed since she left her trailer, and it was impossible to determine whether she had gone missing the second she left or whether she had been out playing for hours when something happened. Special Agent Joseph Bryan was leading the CARD team, and he said that statistically speaking, after this length of time, a staggering and heartbreaking 97% of abducted children have already been murdered. But until you find a body, you're focused on that 3%. There were now over 200 officers from various agencies across the country involved. Until that point in Northern California, there had only been one other missing person search as big as this one. The head of Tracy PD said she had to order people to go home and sleep. Every second of every day they were out, scared that in the hours they slept, they would miss something. As they entered into the following week, the community gathered together for a vigil. Thomas said he knew the outcome of this mystery was not going to be positive. Something terrible had happened to his sister, no matter how hopeful they were trying to be. And the vigil was more about feeling this grief together and being there for Maria. At 8:30 p.m., the investigators who were also in attendance were suddenly caught off guard. A neighbor, Melissa, ran over to them, so hysterical she could barely breathe. She only lived a few trailers down from Sandra's family and had found a handwritten note on the ground, right by one of the mailboxes. So disturbed by what it said, she had dropped it and ran straight over to the officers. It read, "Canta locked in stolen suitcase. Thrown in water on Bicchetti Road and Whitehall Road. Witness, Melissa was right to be disturbed. The implication of this was very sinister, but the note was odd. It looked like there were very deliberate spelling mistakes that had been made to try and cover up who wrote it. Despite this being the first piece of evidence they had found, something did feel a little strange. There was a strong breeze that night. Almost everyone was at the vigil and accounted for. And with officers going up and down the streets for days, it was weird that this had only just turned up in the location it had. Had someone carefully chosen their timing, knowing that everyone was at the vigil and planted it there just minutes before? Was the note fake? Who wrote it? There were so many questions. But firstly, they needed Melissa to come in and give a statement, and the FBI handled her interview. As well as being a neighbor, Melissa worked as a Sunday school teacher in her granddad's church, where he was the local pastor. Having gone through a divorce a few years ago and now a recent breakup, she was living with her grandparents and her 5-year-old daughter, and Sandra and her sisters would often go to her trailer to play with her daughter. Although Sandra didn't go to the church, she and her siblings knew Melissa well. She had become a good friend of the family. Melissa said she hadn't really looked around to see if anyone was nearby when she found the note, or if there was anything else suspicious. They asked if they could take a look at her car, and she agreed. In the glove box, they found a post-it note, with a few words written on it which had been scribbled over. As a precaution, police sent this to experts, but were happy to let her go and focus on the note. Melissa did, however, give them a list of potential suspects to look at. The first person was a man living in the park that she said had a history of drugging children. Another had been seen kissing Sandra on the lips and touching her hair, and then there were 2 other people. A father and son that Melissa said had pictures of young girls in their phones, including some of Sandra on one of their laps. All of them were happy to come in for questioning. The man that had kissed Sandra, to their shock, admitted that he was attracted to young girls, but called it a harmless affection and said he had nothing to do with Sandra being missing. They did find pictures of children on the father and son's phones, which were definitely concerning and questionable given that they had no relationship to any of them, but they too were adamant they knew nothing. 3 of them said they were even happy to undergo polygraph tests, something which is not admissible and could never be used in court, but they wanted to prove in any way they could that they weren't involved. One of the men, the same man who had admitted to kissing Sandra, passed the polygraph and showed no signs of deception, whereas the other men failed. They definitely wanted to keep their eyes on all of them, as they now had concerns that went even further than Sandra, but there was just not enough there to charge anyone, and this was the case they had to give all their attention to at the minute. They wanted to talk to Melissa some more. She clearly had a lot of information about people in the park, and she was still the only person to have come forward with anything. From talking to neighbors, the general consensus was that Melissa would often insert herself into things or make things up to get people to talk to her and feel sorry for her. She loved being the center of attention, and detectives wondered if this was what her behavior was down to, or was she actually a genuine witness and just acting oddly. They found that Melissa had bipolar disorder, anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder, and she did have a past with the law. She had a habit of stealing and on several occasions pleaded no contest to charges or being jailed. She was also a person of interest in a few arson cases, but had left town before anything came of them. She had filed for bankruptcy in 2003, reporting credit card and medical debt, and was still paying it off through her teaching wages. When they tried to get hold of her again to talk some more, they found out she had checked herself into hospital for swallowing a razor blade, something she later claimed was because she was sleepwalking, and despite the fact she was doing okay, she didn't want to be interviewed. Police headed out with a search and rescue team to the location on the note. The directions led them to an irrigation pond, which was where a lot of drains linked to and where sewage and the likes would go. The pond was about 150 yards long and 30 yards wide. The smell and conditions were so bad, there wasn't a chance they would be able to get anything down to the bottom or even see anything. It was thick with all kinds of substances, you couldn't see your own hand in front of you, and it just wasn't safe. But there was nothing floating on the top, and nothing on the grass nearby. Unless something did rise to the surface, it was unlikely they would be able to find out what, if anything, was actually there. It had now been an agonizing 10 days of searching for Sandra, and this missing persons case would soon become a very different investigation. Detectives had been monitoring the irrigation pond, and one morning, while a worker was starting to drain the pond, a black suitcase floated to the top and was now stuck in the mud on the bank. Was a lock on the case which had been secured even further with a cord. Great lengths had been gone to make opening this up as difficult as possible. Pulling it out, they could tell from the weight of it that everyone's worst fears were probably about to be confirmed. Sandra Cantu's body was found in the fetal position inside the suitcase. She was still wearing her black leggings and her Hello Kitty shirt. She had cuts to her body, and they found a piece of torn cloth tied around her head. It was soaked in blood and knotted into a noose. An autopsy would show that her cause of death was strangulation, likely using the noose. She had been drugged using alprazolam and had been sexually assaulted, but there was no presence of foreign DNA found. They determined that she had been sexually assaulted by an unknown object and had been killed only a couple of hours after she was seen on camera. The 8-year-old girl that everybody in the community knew, the same one that knocked on their doors most days to ask if their children would come out to play, the same girl they invited in for dinner and treated like one of their own, was gone. Given the sexual assault, the police quickly built a profile of who their potential suspect would be. A white male, aged 25 to 40, a criminal past which would include sexual assault or possessing child abuse material. He would be someone who was known to Sandra and someone she trusted. Likely a neighbor living in the park or someone that knew another person within the park. This was not a random kidnap. Sandra knew her killer. The registered sex offenders in the area all had their alibis checked, and all of them could be accounted for. The neighbors near the pond were questioned, and one of them had seen something that stood out to him, although he didn't realize it at the time. He lived right near the ditch and said he had seen a dark purple two-toned SUV driving around on the Friday that Sandra went missing. The car was a distinctive color, and it didn't belong to any of the neighbors, and for obvious reasons it was a strange place to be parked up. Most people kept away from the swampy area. He thought it was so odd, in fact, he actually decided to approach the car to see if he knew the driver. But the car was empty. As he stood looking around, a woman suddenly came running out from the trees, saying she had to pull over to go to the toilet. She got back into the car and quickly sped away. The description he gave matched none other than Melissa Huckabee, and CCTV confirmed she drove the same car. Going back to look at the cameras, Melissa had gotten into her SUV from the parking spot, just opposite Sandra's house, at about 3:30 p.m. and drove it back towards her house, which was to the left of where Sandra lived. She then headed to her grandparents' church before being spotted by the resident at the pond at about 5:30 p.m. Despite the fact she was still in the hospital and they had been letting her rest, they were no longer talking to her as a potential witness or even a person of interest. They were now looking at her as a suspect. They marched in ready to get to the bottom of her stories. But she insisted she was none the wiser about what had happened, and all she had done was bring the note to their attention. At 4 p.m. when Sandra had last been seen, Melissa told police that she had been at her church decorating her classroom and hadn't seen anything around that area. Naturally, they asked if she could prove that's where she was, and phone records could provide this. She had actually made her own call to the police to report that her suitcase had been stolen from her driveway. She said that when she heard Sandra was missing, she had even sent a text message to Maria, saying, "Tell the police I had something stolen today around 4 p.m. I don't know if that makes a difference or not." The suitcase Sandra was found in was the exact color and model Melissa reported missing. A black Eddie Bauer suitcase. And the note she allegedly found didn't just say suitcase. It said stolen suitcase. Now there's improbable and then there's impossible. And what Melissa was implying happened would mean that the person that had kidnapped and killed Sandra also happened to find her suitcase on her drive, decided to use that to conceal Sandra and do all of this without being seen or heard by anyone in broad daylight. And then Melissa was the one who happened to find the note. Detectives decided they had to wiretap her phone, and 2 days after she was released from the hospital, they heard a call. Melissa called Maria to invite Sandra's sister Miranda over for a sleepover. Miranda did spend the night and told Maria she thought it was strange that Melissa only mentioned Sandra's disappearance once and seemed more interested in what evidence they had found. Their case against Melissa was building, but it was still all circumstantial. Another neighbor came forward and shared a story with officers. They said a short while before Sandra went missing, Melissa had taken one of the neighboring children to the park for a couple of hours without getting her parents' permission. When the 7-year-old returned home, she was slurring her words, not making any sense, and could barely walk. Her parents rushed her to the hospital and found that she had been drugged with benzodiazepines, exactly the same as what they found in Sandra's system. Melissa denied drugging her and no charges were filed. With so many fingers now pointing at Melissa, she spoke to a reporter to try and clear her name. Hearing the story about the drugs, police finally got a warrant to search her trailer and her granddad's church. Inside the trailer, they discovered a notebook which matched the note Melissa had found on the ground. Other writing inside the book was so distinctive it matched the writing on the note perfectly. The experts examining the post-it note found in her glove box also came back with something pretty damning. The words that were written on the note were Bikety Road, Whitehall Road, water. They also found alprazolam, which had been prescribed to Melissa. Exactly what was found in Sandra's system. Inside the church, they found a rolling pin with a bent handle and a bloody smudge on it. Blood which would later turn out to contain Sandra's DNA. This was what she had been sexually assaulted with. They also discovered one of the blinds was missing part of its draw cord, which the FBI experts determined to be consistent with the cord used to seal the suitcase shut. On April 10th, Melissa was brought in for another interview. Her story was the same, but detectives now had so much evidence and they wanted the truth out of her. When she was confronted with everything they had, she broke down and started crying hysterically. Through muffled tears, she said, "Was an accident. I can't live with myself. I deserve to just die. I didn't mean for it to happen. She just died." She told the police that Sandra had spotted her getting into her car near her house, which was why she turned around in the road. She came up to the car to say hi and then saw the suitcase in the back of her vehicle. Melissa said that Sandra had, without her knowing or seeing, got into the suitcase playing hide and seek, and she must have suffocated. It was only when she drove to the church and lifted the suitcase out of the car that she realized she was in there. She said she tried to give CPR but realized it was too late and in a panic tried to hide her body in the ditch. Detectives said they'd just let her talk, digging herself into more holes as she did so. They already knew the way she was found in the suitcase was not a position she could have gotten to by herself. Sandra had also been drugged and sexually assaulted, and it could only be Melissa behind this. This was no accident. It was a story so convoluted and calculated. The minute she stopped talking, they placed her in handcuffs. Melissa Huckabee was charged with the kidnap, sexual assault, and murder of Sandra Cantu. She was also later charged with drugging the other 7-year-old and her 37-year-old ex-boyfriend. Sandra trusted her completely. She wouldn't have thought twice about going over to Melissa if she had called her towards the car. Police believe that Melissa coaxed Sandra into the car, likely on the premise of coming to help her decorate the church, and Sandra had no issue doing this. Melissa then drove her to her grandfather's nearby church, drugged her to the point where she would have either fallen unconscious or been totally unable to fight back, sexually assaulted her with the rolling pin, strangled her to death, and then stuffed her into the suitcase. By the time people were looking for Sandra, Melissa made the call to police about the suitcase, texted Maria, wrote the note, and attempted to stage being the hero. Melissa pleaded not guilty, and her legal team were focused heavily on the fact that she had just been diagnosed with manic depression and schizophrenia and was clearly not well. They said that when she was 19, she was raped by a police officer, which had caused a buildup of trauma, something which she never wanted to seek treatment for and never spoke about. She attempted to hurt herself in prison too and would often show up to her arraignments with cuts on her body. She was soon placed on suicide watch. Melissa's own parents said they were baffled and couldn't believe their daughter was at the center of this. They had never seen any signs of her even showing anger. Her friends agreed. They said she was a great mother, a lovely neighbor, friendly and kind to everyone. Her mother, Judy, apologized to Maria in court and said, "I felt your pain and I understand the anger you must have. From a mother to a mother, I'm so sorry. Each time that I sit in this courtroom, I place myself on your side and I felt your pain. If I could give you justice, the justice that you deserve, that would be to have your baby girl in your arms right now." When confronted with the vast amounts of evidence the prosecution were about to show, Melissa offered a partial confession and changed her plea to guilty of first-degree murder and kidnapping. As part of the agreement, the charges that she sexually assaulted and drugged Sandra were dropped. In pleading guilty, she avoided the death penalty and the charges of sexual assault, the drugging of Sandra as well as her ex-boyfriend, and other 7-year-old neighboring girl were all dropped. But the prosecution said given the trauma that Dr. O'Malley found and the instrument that was used, it's sadly to say, hard for me to believe that Sandra Cantu did not suffer. Sandra's dad Daniel spoke to Melissa in court and gave a very emotional statement. She was facing 25 years to life, but the judge gave her the maximum. Melissa Huckabee was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. To this day, Melissa Huckabee has never fully admitted to what she did to Sandra, nor has she said why she did it. The district attorney said there were 20 or so times that Melissa cut herself, set fires, or verbally or psychologically attacked someone else, and there was something like that going on here after the murder, where she wanted to be the center of attention. That Friday, Sandra skipped out of her house after a great day at school, ready to see her friends and enjoy her weekend. To think about what happened to her in that church is so awful, and the fact that it was at the hands of someone she and her family trusted and loved so much makes it even more sickening. Right outside her favorite place, her school, the community of Tracy created a special area in her memory. They planted a tree with pink blossoms, built a little sand volleyball court, and a kids' playhouse called Sandra's Cottage. Her grandfather said he wanted it to become a family setting, something she would have loved to go to with her siblings, and something that other children could come and enjoy and make new friends there. Neighbors said that Sandra was like the community's daughter. Everyone knew her so well and saw her as part of their own family. When she went missing, it was a sobering moment for everyone. One officer said, "Life is precious and this little girl only had 8 years and that's it." Thomas said, "She took one of the biggest parts of our lives away. The joy of watching someone blossoming into something they could have been. Time does heal some of it, but there's always things that will linger and that's okay. That's what makes us human." Janelle Matthews was born on February 9, 1972 at Cottage Hospital in Santa Barbara, California. Her biological mother, Terry Vieira, was only 13 years old at the time. In March 1972, Janelle was adopted by James Jim and Gloria Matthews, a loving couple from Greeley, Colorado, who already had a daughter. At the time of her disappearance, Janelle's father was the principal of Platte Valley Elementary School in Kersey, Colorado. It was on December 20th, 1984, just 5 days before Christmas, when Janelle went missing. Earlier that evening, she had returned home after singing carols at a nursing home as part of a middle school choir concert. A friend's parent gave her a ride home and she arrived to find an empty house. Around 8:30 p.m., Janelle entered the house, took off her shoes and turned on the TV. She also switched on a space heater, answered a phone call leaving a message for her father. Her father had been out watching her sister's high school basketball game and returned home about an hour later. To his surprise, the lights and TV were on and Janelle's stockings were on the couch. However, Janelle herself was nowhere to be found. In the family room where Janelle often sat, her shoes and shawl were discovered near a heater. Her older sister Jennifer arrived home at 10 p.m. She had not seen Janelle either. Concerned, their father contacted the police at that point. The police arrived at 10:15 p.m. and noticed footprints in the snow, indicating that someone had been looking into the windows. Despite the absence of signs of a struggle or forced entry, the police suspected foul play due to the circumstances. Massive search efforts were launched to find Janelle, and a reward of $5,000 was offered for any information leading to her safe return. Detectives diligently pursued thousands of leads, and Janelle's photo was distributed on flyers to 4,000 stores across the country. Even as time passed and hope dwindled, her case received national attention, with President Ronald Reagan mentioning her during a speech on missing children in 1985. However, the attention surrounding Janelle's family and friends eventually waned. Despite the lack of concrete evidence regarding her disappearance, the case gradually grew cold. Nevertheless, Janelle remained in the hearts and minds of those who cared about her. In the weeks following her vanishing, law enforcement discreetly placed Janelle's birth mother, Terry Vieira, under surveillance without disclosing the fact that Janelle was missing. In 1994, Janelle was legally declared deceased, yet her body remained undiscovered. Then, in 1997, Gloria Matthews received a letter from Vieira seeking permission to visit Janelle. Vieira had enlisted the help of a search consultant to locate her daughter. The Matthews family informed Vieira about the tragic turn of events and the two families formed a bond. As time passed, Janelle's parents relocated to the Philippines while her sister got married and moved away from Colorado. The mystery surrounding Janelle's disappearance perplexed both Greeley investigators and residents for over 3 decades until a grim discovery shed light on the case. During the installation of a pipeline, workers stumbled upon human remains at 4:50 p.m. on Tuesday, July 23, 2019, near the intersection of County Roads 34.5 and 49 at specific coordinates. Through DNA analysis, the Weld County Coroner's Office definitively identified the remains as belonging to Janelle Matthews. The forensic report determined that Janelle had died from a gunshot wound to the head. In September 2019, shortly after the discovery of Janelle's remains, the long cold case rapidly gained momentum. Authorities conducted a search of a residence in Twin Falls, Idaho, which belonged to Stephen Pankey. Pankey had lived just 2 miles away from Janelle at the time of her disappearance and approximately 10 miles from where her body was eventually found. He attended the same church as Janelle's family and was known to watch over children from her middle school as they walked home. Curiously, just 2 days after Janelle vanished, Pankey embarked on an unexpected road trip to California, during which he obsessively listened to the radio for any news about her, as reported by his ex-wife to the authorities. After commencing excavation in his backyard, Pankey's property experienced a vehicular inferno just a few days later, prompting him to dispose of the car. This series of events quickly garnered attention in the media, although not due to any official statements from the police. Instead, was Pankey himself who took it upon himself to engage in conversations with anyone willing to listen, including CBS affiliate KMVT. In his efforts to clarify his innocence, Pankey emphasized that he had no involvement in the murder, stating, "It wasn't until December 26th when my wife, her 5-year-old, and I returned from California to Colorado that I first learned of Janelle Matthews' existence or disappearance. That was the first time I had any knowledge of it." He further emphasized that he had never met anyone from Janelle's family and made sure to highlight that he willingly provided his DNA and offered to undergo a polygraph test. However, the police did not directly confirm any of Pankey's claims. During an interview conducted by Callie Worthman of CBS Denver over FaceTime, Pankey expressed his concern about being framed, citing previous issues he had encountered with local law enforcement and fearing the possibility of facing baseless charges once again. Greeley Mayor and former police officer John Gates, who was acquainted with Pankey, stated that Pankey was not initially considered a person of interest when Janelle first went missing. Pankey himself revealed that he and his family had left Greeley for 5 days the morning after Janelle disappeared. Approximately a month later, Pankey unexpectedly inserted himself into the investigation, providing some information regarding Janelle's disappearance. According to Pankey, his father-in-law, who worked as a groundskeeper at a Greeley cemetery, shared unsettling details with him 7 days after Janelle vanished. Allegedly, his father-in-law had been contacted by a police officer who claimed to have a body that needed to be buried. Pankey explained to KMVT that he decided to share information with the FBI out of fear that he might be wrongly implicated in Janelle's murder. The story sounded quite unbelievable, and there was no way to verify if he actually visited the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Police records revealed that Pankey had previous encounters with the Greeley police for unrelated issues, mostly involving minor offenses like causing a disturbance and harassment. Interestingly, the day before Janelle vanished, Pankey was arrested at a bank for harassment and criminal trespass. On October 12, 2020, was arrested for kidnapping and first-degree murder in connection with Janelle's case. Pankey pleaded not guilty to these charges. His defense attorney at the time stated that there was no evidence linking him to the crime or the burial of the body. According to the attorney, Pankey simply enjoyed being in the spotlight, and all his statements regarding his involvement were along the lines of, "I didn't do it." On October 13, 2021, Steve Pankey's trial commenced. Prosecutors informed the jury that Pankey had made self-incriminating remarks about Janelle's case over the years. One of the key witnesses, Pankey's ex-wife, Angela Hicks, testified about her experiences during their marriage. She recounted being compelled to listen to news reports about Janelle's disappearance and share details about discovering a note in Pankey's trash. Among the writings on the legal paper was "No, outside Matthew's house was raped." Steve Pankey took the stand after listening to the testimonies of multiple witnesses. He admitted that, in the past, he had fabricated information about the case. "To be honest, I made up a lot of things out of bitterness. I was foolishly trying to appear important, but in reality, I had no knowledge of the matter," Pankey stated. As early as 1999, Pankey had already approached law enforcement seeking immunity in exchange for sharing any information he had regarding the killing. He wrote letters to the police detailing his alibi and even filed court cases discussing Janelle. On November 2, 2021, the jurors received the case, and within 2 days they reached a verdict. Although the jury found him guilty of providing false reports to authorities, they were unable to reach a unanimous decision on the kidnapping and murder charges. Consequently, the judge declared a mistrial for those counts. Prosecutors involved in this case have announced their intention to pursue a new trial for the charges of murder and kidnapping. Currently, Stephen Pankey remains in custody, awaiting a new trial date. On the winter day of February 19, 1982, at approximately 5 p.m., law enforcement officers promptly responded to a distress call from a concerned neighbor regarding the Krausnick residence at 33 Del Rio Drive in Brighton, New York. Upon entering the master bedroom of the family's home, the officers were confronted with a horrifying sight. Kathy Krausnick, tragically struck with a single blow to the head by an axe, was discovered lifeless on her bed. The circumstances surrounding this brutal act of violence raise questions as to the motive behind the killing. Was the perpetrator someone known to Kathy, or was it an unfortunate incident stemming from a random robbery gone awry? Today's narrative unfolds in the serene town of Brighton, New York, situated in Monroe County, near the southeastern border of Rochester. This charming suburban community has its own unique character and is cherished by its residents. To delve into Kathy Krausnick's background, she was born as Kathleen Schlosser in Mount Clemens, Michigan in 1952. Growing up in a modest working-class family, Kathy was one of 7 siblings. Known for her vibrant personality and blonde locks, she was well-liked during her time at a Michigan high school. It was during this period that she crossed paths with James Krausenk, a reserved, amiable, and athletic young man hailing from a prominent local family. Although only a year older than Kathy, their connection blossomed not only in high school, but also during their shared educational journey at Western Michigan University. Despite their contrasting natures and differing family backgrounds, love prevailed, and the couple embarked on a lifelong journey together. In May 1974, Kathy and James exchanged vows in a church ceremony in Mount Clemens. The following year, armed with her bachelor's degree and James with his newly acquired master's degree, they relocated to Fort Collins, Colorado. It was there that James pursued his PhD studies at Colorado State University. While Kathy experienced the heartache of a miscarriage shortly after their move, she later gave birth to their beloved daughter, Sarah, a few years down the road. James successfully completed his doctoral dissertation and commenced his teaching career at Lynchburg College in Virginia. Despite being referred to as Dr. Krausenk at Lynchburg, it is worth noting that he had not officially received his doctoral degree. His thesis was sent back for revisions and James neglected to resubmit his work. Kathy encouraged him to seek a more profitable career path to provide a better life for their family, but he hesitated, likely due to his lack of necessary qualifications. Despite his desperate attempts to secure a raise, his request was denied. Eventually, he accepted a position as an economist at Kodak, joining the Kodak family of 60,000 employees. With his new high-paying job and financial assistance from his parents, the Krauseneks purchased a new home on Del Rio Drive in the Rochester suburb of Brighton, New York, close to the Kodak headquarters. After settling into their new residence, Kathy enrolled Sarah in Queen of Peace Nursery School nearby and made some friends. She also signed Sarah up for dance classes. Despite feeling somewhat isolated during James' long work hours and Sarah's activities, Kathy never voiced any complaints. By early 1982, they seemed to be living the American dream. They had a charming 3-year-old daughter, a well-kept suburban home, and James' new lucrative economist position at Eastman Kodak. However, trouble was brewing. Kodak officials were doubtful of James' PhD as he delayed providing proof of his degree. This, along with work stress, caused him to become distant from his family. Kathy confided in friends that he often returned home from work in a bad mood. The couple had been experiencing difficulties for some time. Kathy was reportedly upset because he had lied about completing his PhD, causing strain in their relationship. She even mentioned the possibility of taking Sarah and returning to their hometown. Despite this, there were no reports of domestic violence. Unfortunately, tragedy would soon strike the Krausenk family. Upon the morning of February 19, 1982, merely 6 months subsequent to relocating to their new residence, officers from the Brighton Police Department were summoned to a 911 call. James Krausenk arrived back home from his workplace to discover his 29-year-old wife, Kathy's lifeless body, nestled in bed in an upstairs bedroom with their 3.5-year-old daughter, Sarah, gazing out of the window. Upon entering the residence, the officers encountered a horrific crime scene in the master bedroom. Kathy was found lying in a pool of blood in her own bed with a long-handled axe lodged in her skull. The murder weapon was retrieved from the couple's unlocked garage. Sarah had been at home with her mother all day, but remained unharmed. When questioned about his whereabouts that day, James stated that his wife and daughter were sound asleep when he departed for work at approximately 6:30 a.m. that morning. He mentioned returning home at 5 p.m. before discovering his wife's body. James recounted grabbing his daughter and fleeing the house, seeking help from a neighbor. When questioned, young Sarah mentioned seeing a malevolent figure, but her father prevented further communication with the investigators. The crime scene did not yield many clues. Although signs of a burglary were evident, investigators sensed that something was amiss. Broken window was discovered, along with silver and jewelry neatly arranged both upstairs and downstairs, as if deliberately left behind by the intruder. In the dining room, 2 candelabra and a silver tea set were found upright near a plastic bag. A screwdriver was located on the stairs. Kathy's purse was scattered in the dining room. The family dog had been confined to the basement. Interestingly, no items were reported stolen. leading investigators to suspect that the burglary was staged. The medical examiner determined that Kathy's demise resulted from a single axe blow to the head and brain while she was asleep. The handle of the axe had been meticulously cleaned, leaving no trace of fingerprints or DNA. The time of death was narrowed down to a 2-hour window between 6:55 a.m. and 8:55 a.m., which effectively eliminated Kathy's husband James as a suspect. This chilling case quickly gained notoriety in the media and became known as the infamous Brighton Axe murder. During the initial investigation, one of the suspects considered by the investigators was Ed Larrabee, a convicted killer and sex offender who happened to live near the couple's residence at the time. Interestingly, in 2014, while serving time for an unrelated murder, Larrabee shockingly confessed to killing Kathy Krausneck. However, his confession didn't align with the evidence. Larrabee claimed the murder took place during the summer of 1981, when in reality it occurred in the winter of 1982. It turned out that Larrabee had a reputation for falsely confessing to crimes he hadn't committed, seeking attention and notoriety. Some of the victims he claimed to have murdered were actually alive and well. The investigators faced a daunting challenge as they lacked substantial physical or circumstantial evidence to connect anyone to the crime. Despite their tireless efforts, the Brighton Axe murder remained an unsolved mystery for many years, haunting the community and leaving Kathy's family desperate for answers. In a shocking turn of events, just a day after Kathy's tragic passing, James abruptly returned to Mount Clemens with their daughter Sarah, without even notifying Kathy's grieving family. This sudden disappearance severed all contact between Sarah and her maternal relatives, leaving them heartbroken and bewildered. 4 years later, in 1986, James remarried. However, the marriage was short-lived, lasting only 9 months. While James claimed that he remarried to provide Sarah with a mother figure, his second wife believed that he ended the union due to a growing bond between her and Sarah. As the 1990s unfolded, James went on to marry 2 more times. He relocated to Washington and found success in his career, climbing the corporate ladder at a subsidiary of Weyerhaeuser. His professional journey took him to California and Georgia before he ultimately achieved the position of vice president of sales at the company's headquarters in Washington. Despite his tumultuous personal life, James seemed to have found stability and happiness with his 4th wife, Sharon. They enjoyed a luxurious lifestyle, seemingly leaving behind the shadows of the past. They purchased a beautiful 4-bedroom French country house in Gig Harbor near Tacoma. However, life took a different turn for Sarah as she moved to Texas and started her own family. Despite the distance, she remained closely connected with her father and stepmother. As the years went by, the case seemed to have hit a dead end until District Attorney Sandra Dorley and her team decided to dig deeper in 2015. They tirelessly searched for any evidence that might have been overlooked before. Among the discoveries was a delicate blue fiber made of glass, which originated from a shattered window in the house. Dorley attempted to match it with a previously untested blue knee sock found at the scene. Despite extensive testing, no DNA from an external source was found, effectively eliminating the possibility of an outside killer. The focus then shifted to Kathy's husband James as the prime suspect. However, charging him solely based on circumstantial evidence was not an option, and there was another obstacle to overcome. The timeline of Kathy's death placed James outside of the house at the time of the murder, seemingly ruling him out as a suspect. Nevertheless, Dorley and her team were determined not to let him off the hook so easily. They sought the expertise of renowned forensic pathologist, Dr. Michael Baden, who had played a crucial role in numerous high-profile cases. After thoroughly examining all the relevant documents, including police reports, autopsy reports, photographs, and other evidence, Baden reached a significant conclusion. Contrary to the original medical examiner's findings, he believed that Kathy had died before James left for work that morning. Baden pointed out that the partially digested food in her stomach and the stage of rigor mortis her body was in indicated an earlier time of death. The initial examiner had observed rigor mortis setting in the evening of the crime, but Baden explained that it takes at least 12 hours for a body to reach that level of rigor mortis. Therefore, he concluded that the murder must have occurred between 9 p.m. the previous evening and 3 or 4 a.m. on the morning of the crime. In 2019, James Krausenk was arrested and charged with the murder of his wife based on Dr. Baden's analysis and other evidence. His trial commenced in August 2022. The defense argued that the evidence was circumstantial and suggested that Larrabee, who had already passed away, could have been responsible for Kathy's death. However, the prosecutors contended that there was no evidence of an intruder. The robbery was staged, and James was the only plausible suspect, especially considering their young daughter remained unharmed despite being present at the scene. Ultimately, the jury sided with the prosecution, leading to James Krausenk's conviction for second-degree murder. Despite this, his daughter Sarah, who is now 41 years old, continues to support her father, and does not believe he had any involvement in her mother's. Conversely, after enduring 40 years of grief, Kathy's family finds solace in the fact that justice has finally been served. Annette Schlosser, Kathy's sister, shared with Spectrum News that their mother passed away without ever knowing who took her daughter's life, describing their experience as living in a state of torment. Annette firmly believes that no one could commit such a heinous act against her sister. However, Kathy's 95-year-old father was present in court to witness James being held accountable for his daughter's horrific murder. Now, the Schlosser family's sole desire is to reconnect with Kathy's daughter, as they have had no contact with her for several years. They express their hope that they can all find healing together after enduring this tragic incident. James Krausenk was eventually sentenced to 25 years to prison by a judge. However, 6 months later, he died in his cell. For many years, Hastings on the Sussex coast in the south of England has been seen as a great place for a nice getaway or somewhere to move to for a new start. It's close to the sea with plenty of fascinating history to enjoy. There are gorgeous parks and lovely local shops. This is where our story begins. One Saturday afternoon in February 1997, on Lower Park Road lived the Jenkins family. Father Sean, Mother Lois and their children, Charlotte, Annie, Maya, Esther and Billy Joe, who was their foster daughter. On the 15th of February 1997, it was the end of the February half-term, when children enjoy a week off school. It was an unusually hot day and many were out in Alexandra Park enjoying the sunshine. Alexandra Park is located directly opposite Lower Park Road, and it is often busy with families, dog walkers, and joggers. That day, Billy Joe was in the garden painting the back patio doors. Annie was at home too, along with Sean. Lois had taken Maya and Esther for a walk with their dog, and Charlotte was at a clarinet lesson. Lois had taken the youngest girls for a walk after having an argument with Billy Joe over a pair of trainers she told Billy Joe she couldn't have. Billy Joe's best friend Holly had offered to go round and help her paint the doors, but Sean told her she couldn't, as Billy Joe was due to be seeing her biological father that weekend, so it wouldn't be possible for her to go over. Billy Joe and Holly spent loads of time with each other and went to Helenswood School together too. They loved hanging out and listening to their favorite E17 songs. The day continued to pass by, and it was soon time for Sean to go and collect Charlotte and one of Charlotte's friends from their music lesson. He set off with Annie, and Billy Joe stayed behind on her own in the garden to carry on painting and listening to music. After dropping Charlotte's friend off, they headed back to Lower Park Road, and Charlotte ran inside and upstairs to put her clarinet away. When she came back down, Sean said they needed to go out again to get some white spirit to remove some paint splashes that Billy Joe had made. They set off in his car to a DIY store, but before they made it there, Sean realized he didn't have any money with him, so they headed home. After getting back to the house at 3:30 p.m., Charlotte had gone inside, and at the back of the property, she came across a traumatizing scene. 13-year-old Billy Joe was lying on the patio with the left side of her face to the ground and blood all around her. She was still holding the paintbrush. She screamed and called for her dad, who came running and then ushered his daughters into the playroom away from her body. He called his neighbor and family friend, Denise Lancaster, asking for her help. Denise immediately went over. She said Billy Joe's skull was shattered and that she was so badly injured she didn't even want to touch her, telling Sean to ring for an ambulance. She described Billy Joe's head as being on a bin liner, and part of the bin liner was deep inside her left nostril. Emergency services quickly descended on the scene, and the quiet residential street was soon full of police and paramedics. A police surgeon who attended the scene said it was one of the worst cases he had ever seen in his career. "I have 26 years of experience of being a police surgeon, and this is without doubt the saddest and most brutal murder I have ever attended," he said. While chaos was unfolding on Lower Park Road, Lois was completely none the wiser. The weather was beautiful, and so, wondering if the rest of the family wanted to come out and enjoy the sun, she phoned home. Sean picked up the phone and said, "Billy's had an accident." She raced back home where she was met by a police officer who had tears in his eyes. He led Lois back into the house. Billy Joe had been bludgeoned to death with an 18-inch iron tent peg that had come from the shed located at the bottom of the garden. The tent peg had been put on the bunker of the patio earlier that day by one of the other children. She had not been the victim of a sexual assault, and there was no evidence to suggest a break-in. Who on earth would murder a 13-year-old girl in the back garden of her own home in the middle of the day when people were out and about? As the investigation got underway and lines of inquiry were being followed, Sean provided the police with some disturbing information. He said that roughly 2 weeks before Billy Joe's death, he had found a man in their back garden, and 2 weeks prior to that he had also seen a man staring at the house from across the street in Alexandra Park. The family had found the side gate open several times and had become so concerned by this man that security lighting was installed at the property and locks were added to the windows. The previous year, locals had become so concerned with safety in the park after reports of men exposing themselves and drug deals taking place that 1,000 people signed a petition arguing for security in the park to be increased. The house next door to the Jenkins family was abandoned and had been boarded up to protect it from vandalism, which was also becoming a big problem in the area alongside robberies. And police said they were looking at a new theory. Had Billy Joe's killer been hiding in the house next door and waiting for the perfect moment to strike? Billy Joe had even said that she was worried she had been followed by someone since December, telling her friends that a white man in a leather jacket in his 40s or 50s had been following her. This description matched the man that Sean said had been watching the house from Alexandra Park. This was not the only time this had happened. 2 years before, Billy Joe had said she was worried she was being stalked by someone, and both her school and the police were made aware of the situation. She had received several cold calls from someone who told her she was being watched. Lois was aware of the phone calls but believed that the person on the other end had not spoken. Detective Superintendent Jeremy Payne said she had told her parents and friends she felt she was being followed and had spotted a man on some occasions. It appears that she felt this man was paying particular attention to her for some reason. By late 1996, Sean and Lois were considering moving home. This must have been incredibly difficult for Billy Joe. She had already been through a lot in her short life. Billy Joe Margaret Jenkins was born on March 29, 1983 in East London to parents Deborah and Bill Jenkins. At the age of 9, Billy Joe was placed in foster care as her mother had not been able to cope and her father had gone to prison. Her mother said she had placed her children in foster care due to her husband's violence. It was in a newspaper advert in 1992 that Sean and Lois Jenkins, who coincidentally shared the same surname, answered the call for foster parents. Newham Social Services visited and placed a 9-year-old girl with them, Billy Joe Jenkins, and her 13-year-old brother, Daryl. Daryl left the foster family a few months later, but Billy Joe stayed. Sean worked in education and Lois was a social worker, so it seemed to be a great fit for Billy Joe. In 1993, they moved to Hastings from London after Sean got a job at William Parker School for Boys, and they settled into a house on Lower Park Road. The stability and security seemed to be perfect for Billy Joe. Lois and Sean had met at a charity event in London in 1982 while he was working as a supply teacher, and they married in Dorset in December the same year. 2 years later, they welcomed their first daughter and then had 3 more in 1986, 1988, and 1989. After being with the family for several years, Sean and Lois eventually became her legal guardians. It wasn't always easy for Billy Joe or her foster family. Foster care can be an unsettling and traumatic experience for many children, and these complexities often require deep empathy, patience, and understanding on behalf of those who care for them. But Billy Joe was still a bright and lively young girl who worked hard and was well liked amongst her peers. As one of her neighbors later said, Billie Jo was a young lady in the old-fashioned sense of the word. It was rare to meet a young girl with such manners. It was a life that was so full of promise and hope, a life that had been cruelly and violently snatched away in a shocking act of brutality. A post-mortem was carried out, and it was discovered that in the ferocity of the attack, her skull had been split. She had been attacked from behind and hit at least 5 times. Whoever had done this was clearly a dangerous offender, and the police needed to bring them to justice. One person the police were looking at was a local man known only as Mr. B. He was described as a white man, 5'10" with fair hair and some sort of scar or birthmark on his face. He was seen carrying a baguette and a plastic bag from the shop Safeway. While the investigation continued, the police knew they needed more. So on the 18th of February, the police asked Sean to appeal to the public for any information relating to the case. Lois appeared with him and struggled to contain her devastation. Sean read the following prepared statement. As a family, we are totally devastated. We do not understand why or what the motive was, but we are working closely with the police in the hope that the killer will be found and that we can eventually piece our lives back together over the coming years. As parents, our sadness drives us to work closely with the police to find her killer. We therefore appeal to anyone who thinks they have any information about this crime to contact the police. He also spoke about the alleged prowlers in the area. As a family, we have felt uneasy about prowlers. On one occasion, I was looking out of the back window and I thought I saw movement. I switched on the security light and got a fleeting glimpse of somebody moving about. Another time, I saw somebody in the park staring at the house. Sean and Lois's daughter Charlotte also told the police that when they had left to go to the DIY shop, the back gate was closed. When they returned, she said it was open. 9 days later, an arrest was made and a man was taken into custody, and he had even tried to strangle the arresting officer. It was Mr. B. On the day of Billie Jo's murder, Mr. B had what was referred to as a rather confused conversation with someone who owned a nearby guest house. He had rung the bell and asked for accommodation, and the owner said it was clear that this man had mental health issues and suggested he would be able to find accommodation in the town center. The route that he pointed him in would have meant he walked past the Jenkins home. His behavior in custody also caused great concern. At one point, he was found in a fetal position with part of a plastic bag shoved into one of his nostrils, as he believed he had to block the body openings to stop germs from getting in. When Billie Jo was found, part of a plastic bin bag had been lodged in one of her nostrils. More plastic was also found in his underwear. However, he was soon released from custody and into secure psychiatric care, and was ruled out as several witnesses had placed him at least 15 minutes away from the house on Lower Park Road. There was also no forensic evidence to link him to the crime. Another man was arrested a few days later, but he too was ruled out and released. Soon there would be a development that would leave people stunned. Sean Jenkins was arrested and taken into custody on suspicion of murdering his foster daughter. He was adamant that he had nothing to do with it, but 3 weeks later he was charged with murder and dishonestly obtaining a pecuniary advantage. After looking into his background, it was revealed that he had not been truthful about his teaching experience or his qualifications in order to secure a job as deputy headmaster at William Parker School. He had said that he had attended the prestigious private Gordonstown School and that he had 10 O-levels at grade A, when in actual fact he had CS and below. He said he had gone to the University of Kent and graduated with a 2.1 in English and then got his postgraduate teaching qualification in English with drama. This was also not true. He had just studied to become a teacher with PE as his subject. He said he had gained a master's in education management from the University of London. He actually did have that degree, but it was from the University of East London. To the police, this was evidence that Sean Jenkins was an accomplished liar. As they continued to look into him, there would be yet another twist. 3 weeks after the murder of Billie Jo, a woman walked into Hastings Police Station and told them her story. Lois Jenkins. On the face of it, this appeared to be a very happy family, but talking to Lois and the children painted a very different picture of Sean. When looking at what had happened that day in the lead-up to the murder, tension between Annie and Billie Jo was examined. The police notes read, Lois believes that Sean loved them both, but has a theory that if Sean lost it on Saturday, it would have been around this. Billy smugly painting something Annie desperately wanted to do. Winding Annie up, confirmed by Annie. Annie hangdog and depressed, washing the Opel car. Sean suddenly thinking, what am I doing? Why am I allowing this to happen? A gesture from Billy to Annie to rub it in further as she was prone to do. It was enough to make Sean snap. It wasn't just his CV that came under scrutiny. Prior to the murder, Sean had decided he wanted to venture into politics and join the Conservative Party, despite his left-wing views. And it was during this time that Lois said he began to lie, which caused arguments between the two of them. She said he wrote a small manifesto about himself, which I knew to be inaccurate. He said he was a regular theatergoer, yet we hadn't been to a theater performance for 6 years. We argued endlessly about his strange behavior. It wasn't just arguments that were causing a problem, but violence too, according to Lois. She said, I think he felt insecure. I never thought his behavior was normal, but I got used to it. I ended up feeling very sorry for him, as I felt he was a victim of emotions that he couldn't control. She also was worried about the discipline he was using on the children. There was a book that was popular at the church they attended called Dare to Discipline, and after attending a series of talks by James Dobson, the author of said book, Sean had started to use a stick in corporal punishment at home. Lois said Sean would use a stick or a slipper. If I challenged Sean's discipline, he would lose his temper, and sometimes he threatened me. She said that the violence had started before they were even married, with the first instance being 3 weeks before their wedding day. He lost his temper and slapped me around my face, she told police. A few weeks after the marriage, he had a violent outburst and slapped me again. I was surprised at how volatile he was and felt frightened. When he lost his temper, he never shouted. He would just lose it, snap, and in a few moments he would be back to normal. She said his violence continued to escalate. When we lived in Eastham, Sean hit me one night and pulled my hair, which was long then. It was the first time I was really frightened of him. I told him I was not going to put up with it anymore. For the first time, he admitted he had a temper. Previously, he had always blanked it out and refused to admit that he had hit me. She didn't tell social services any of this when they came to place Billy Joe with them. Billy Joe was now gone, and the spotlight was firmly on Sean Jenkins. Sean told police that after returning home, he had gone into the dining room to turn the music down and said that there was no reaction from Billy Joe. He described the moment he found her. I felt her neck. I moved the hair off the side of her face. I then became aware that her forehead appeared to be different, misshapen. I also saw that her eye was swollen, as if someone had punched her. I then noticed a bubble from her nose, and I believed that she was alive at that moment. I also noticed that I had blood on my hands. I felt sick. On the day of the murder, Sean had been wearing a blue fleece, trousers, and shoes. When his clothes were examined, they were found to have more than 100 tiny blood spots on them. The exact amount does differ depending on the source, and it was argued that these had come from him attacking her, also known as impact spatter. The case that was presented was that after returning from picking Charlotte up, he had bludgeoned Billy Joe in a fit of rage and then hurried out of the house to the DIY store to give himself an alibi, being sure to drive an extra long, unnecessarily long route. The time frame of him getting home and then leaving again was about 3 minutes. Sean said that this version of events was not true and he was not responsible for her death. There were several aspects of Sean's behavior which had struck the investigators as strange. They had gone to go and buy white spirit, but there later turned out to already be some in the house. Also, after finding Billy Joe, Sean left his children with the neighbor and went and sat in his car. He later said that he realized as he was sat there that it was a stupid thing to do, so proceeded to get out. With the forensics of the blood spots and the belief that they could only have got onto his clothes from the impact of the attack, the police formally charged him with murder on the 14th of March. Tuesday, April 22, 1997, Billy Joe's funeral service was held at a chapel in East London. A horse-drawn carriage transported her coffin, and behind it walked nearly 300 people, holding onto each other for support and comfort. Many people had traveled from Hastings to be there. Just before the service was due to start, Lois arrived with her 4 daughters, and Billy Joe's mother Deborah froze. She had specifically asked her to stay away from the service. Deborah then ran out of the service in tears, followed by her partner. They drove away and missed both the service and the burial. Sean was on bail at the time but did not go to the funeral. June 1998. It was now time for Sean Jenkins to go on trial, and the media interest in the trial would be huge. During his trial, it was put forward by the prosecution that Sean had murdered Billy Joe after frustrating and irritating events during the day, but they added that the real motive behind the killing might never come to light. The prosecution argued that there was a small time frame when he was alone in the house with Billy Joe as his daughters waited for him outside. They said that it was in this time frame that he flew into a rage, attacking her with a tent peg, before going back out to the front of the house and setting off to the DIY store. His daughter told the court that the route he had driven was weird. He had left Lower Park Road and turned onto Bethune Way, then onto St. Helens Road and finally Dordirect Way, and back onto Lower Park Road, looping the park twice, before finally going in the direction of the DIY shop. At the traffic lights by the Sainsbury's on Saddlescombe Road North, he realized he hadn't brought any money with him, so they turned around and drove back empty-handed. This journey totaled around 15 minutes. It was argued he had taken this route and decided to go to the shop to provide himself with an alibi. The case relied heavily upon the blood spots and the belief that they had come from the murder, but the defense hit back at this and said that they had got onto his clothes when he found her and moved her. They said air was released from her lungs as she was moved, thus spraying him with tiny fine blood spots. The defense also presented an experiment to the court to show that this could have been how the blood spots got onto his clothes. Dr. Ian Hill, a pathologist, was called by the prosecution to offer his opinion on said experiment. He called the experiment quite unrealistic, because the amount of air they used was more than an adult breathing would use, and he added that there was only a blockage in her lower airway. It was later revealed that the blockage had actually been in her upper airway. The blood spots were also looked at under an electron microscope by Dr. Jeremy Skepper of Cambridge University. He said that the blood spots contained white particles that could have been damaged skin tissue from her head. The claims that they had got there from Billy Joe's breathing were labeled as impossible by an expert witness. Professor David Salford from Keele University said that he had no doubt that he regarded it as impossible, given the level and nature of the injuries she had. He said that it was highly unlikely that Billy Joe could have inhaled the 2.2 liters of air necessary for her to exhale forcefully enough for the blood to spatter. I still doubt whether she would have been able to inhale 2.2 liters with a gasp, but I accept that at the very worst she might have been able to. It is very unlikely, but I can't say it couldn't possibly happen. I am talking way out on the extremes of what could happen in extreme situations, he said. He said that gasping like that would have been extremely visible, and that he had seen nothing in Sean's statement that mentioned her gasping. Another forensic expert seconded this opinion. The nature and the distribution of the blood stains on Mr. Jenkins' clothing was entirely consistent with the results of the wearer of the clothing having delivered several blows onto wet blood, and the clothing having intercepted an impact mist of the blood as a result. It was noted that neither Denise, who had gone to Billy Joe after Sean had called for her help, nor the paramedics had similar blood spots on them. The home office pathologist, Dr. Ian Hill, had been the person to carry out the postmortem on Billy Joe. He said that the bruises and cuts to her hands and arms were consistent with her trying to defend herself from the onslaught. Billy Joe's biological mother left the courtroom in tears after a video of the police examining her daughter's body was played. Billy Joe's biological father also left the public gallery. Jury members were also left very upset, and those sat in the public gallery gasped at the video. Sean was given special permission to leave the dock while it played. The video showed Billy Joe as she lay on her back, blood soaked into her white shirt and her awful head injury visible. It was now time for Sean to give evidence. He said that he had panicked when he found her body and explained that he went to call for an ambulance. But as he did, the phone had started to ring. He said he picked up the phone and slammed it down to stop it. "I didn't want to speak to anyone. I just panicked," he said. When asked how he helped Billy Joe, he told the court, "I went down to her and whispered to her gently, and I don't know what I did next." He was asked by the prosecutor why he chose to use that phone and not the one close to her body. He replied, "The girls were screaming and screeching and crying and I wanted to be near them. I wasn't sure whether there was somebody else in the house and I didn't want to leave the girls. I didn't make a rational decision. Why, when the emergency services had asked him to, did he not put her in the recovery position? I'm not even sure I knew what the recovery position was. When I saw Billy, I was stunned and I didn't know what to do and I panicked. The prosecutor responded. When looking at his behavior after the murder, the prosecution said that him being slow to call for the ambulance and the claims that he went to his car to put the soft top up over worries about its security were indications of guilt. But a neurologist said that these could have been the response to being in shock. The topic of whether or not to use the children as witnesses became a big issue. Lois told the police that their children had since changed their stories, which had previously backed up Sean's version of events and suggested that he would not have had the time to kill Billy Joe before leaving to go to the DIY store. She said that they had now turned against him and could no longer be called as witnesses. There was also a statement from Annie which was not put before the court. It alleged that her father had once punched her in the stomach with such force she had needed to lie down. The police had asked her about the physical punishments meted out by her father and she replied, "But doesn't every family have a naughty stick?" The jury also did not hear Lois' testimony as she did not appear for either the prosecution or the defense. The trial would last for 19 days and 15 witnesses would be called, including psychiatrists and forensic experts. The jury would deliberate for 2 days and on the second day the judge told them he would accept a majority verdict of 10-2. They then came back with a unanimous one. Sean Jenkins was convicted of the murder of Billy Joe and sentenced to life in prison. The guilty verdict prompted shouts of "yes" from the public gallery. Mr. Justice Gage told him that he had been convicted on the back of what he called compelling evidence. By any standards, this is a horrendous crime. The fact you committed this crime, the circumstances in which it was committed and the way in which it was committed, lead me to conclude that you are a very considerable danger to the community. There is only one sentence. You will be sentenced to the equivalent of life. Lois Jenkins filed for divorce and took their children and moved to Australia where she would later remarry and have a son. She said in a statement, 16 months ago I returned with 2 of my children from a quiet Saturday afternoon walk on the beach to a tragedy more horrific than any person ever expects to encounter in a lifetime. It is a terrible thing to realize that the man with whom you have lived for 14 years, the father of your children, is capable of murdering your child. There is no reason, no explanation for such a pointless waste of a young life. Now that the trial is over, the girls and I need peace and quiet to come to terms with what has happened. In 1999, Sean lodged an appeal against his conviction. He argued that the forensic evidence that had been presented was inaccurate. He lost this appeal on December 21st. But that is not the end of the story. In 2002, the Criminal Cases Review Commission, which investigates suspected miscarriages of justice, commissioned Kent Police to re-interview Annie and Charlotte in Tasmania. They had both suggested they could not recall making the comments their mother had attributed to them. On the 12th of May 2003, the Criminal Cases Review Commission had been looking into the case now for 2 years, and it was subsequently moved back to the Court of Appeal. The Criminal Cases Review Commission said that the jury had not heard evidence from Sean's daughters, who had corroborated what he had said. His appeal began on the 30th of June 2004. After flying in from Tasmania, where she now lived with her mother and siblings, Charlotte gave evidence at the appeal. Sean's lawyers argued that if Charlotte and Annie had been allowed to testify during the first trial, they could have corroborated his story. They also said that Lois had lied to the police when she said that they had changed their stories against him. During Charlotte's evidence, she said that she had been worried about incriminating her father and that he might not ever like her again if she did so. She told the court that it was a possibility that she had said to Lois that she knew Sean was responsible for Billy Joe's murder. She didn't contradict what her mother had said, but admitted that her memories were hazy. When talking about the day of Billy Joe's murder, she said that she had remembered having her clarinet lesson and being picked up by Sean before he drove both her and Annie home. While Charlotte was not asked about how long they spent at the house, the defense asked her to talk about what she could remember. She said she remembered going quickly up to her bedroom to put her clarinet away, and that they soon left to go to the DIY shop. What follows is a transcript of the questions and answers between Charlotte and Sean's defense lawyer, Claire Montgomery QC, who asked who was the first to enter the house. I think it was me. Where did you go? Into the dining room. We know you saw Billy Joe. Charlotte then began to cry and nod. She asked for a break and left the courtroom, and after having a breather, she came back to continue her evidence. The lawyer asked her about conversations Lois said she had had with her daughter that dissuaded the defense team from the first trial from calling the children as witnesses. She asked if Charlotte had told Lois that she was worried about incriminating Sean. Did Charlotte tell Lois that she just knew Sean had murdered Billy Joe? Charlotte responded, I may have because I was confused and kept changing my mind. I can't remember. I was confused remembering the day, wondering whether or not to believe what was in the papers, things like that. Had you believed your father was guilty? I can't remember. What made you think he was guilty? What was being said to you? I can't remember thinking it, so I don't understand why you're asking. She also denied that Lois had coached her and turned her against her father. She added that at no time had he coached her on what to say or asked her about her story. The prosecutor had planned for a lengthy cross-examination, but after hearing Charlotte's evidence, chose not to ask any questions. Annie had declined to come back to the UK from Tasmania, saying it would disrupt her studies and she had only just started to settle there. She did give a video interview and extracts of the interview were read to the court. She said that she didn't remember some of the conversations Lois had spoken to the police about. She spoke about occasions where Sean allegedly exhibited violence towards them, saying he had punched her in the stomach and also kicked Billy Joe. She said she couldn't remember an alleged incident in which he reportedly dragged their sister Maya up 2 flights of stairs by her ears. Lois did testify against Sean during his appeal and described him as going into violent rages, with one such incident leaving her with a perforated eardrum. 2 years after they had moved to the coast, Lois said an attack from Sean had left her needing hospital treatment. He hit me around the face hard and my head was spinning with the force of it. I went upstairs and hid in the loft, crying. Later I went downstairs and it was as if Sean had forgotten. Sean's lawyer said that Lois had become sure that he was responsible for Billy Joe's murder and worried that Charlotte and Annie's original statements could provide him with an alibi, as they would have shown he would not have had enough time to kill Billy Joe before going to the DIY store. The defense also suggested that Lois had lied to the police by saying that the girls' accounts had drastically changed and they could no longer be called to give evidence, adding that she was worried that the statements from their daughters could prove his innocence, meaning he could have returned home. The defense said that the girls' accounts had not changed at all and had they been allowed to testify at the first trial, he might not have been convicted. During the appeal, Charlotte didn't suggest that what her mother had attributed to her was incorrect. The appeal judges believed Lois's account and dismissed the idea that the defense had been misled. The appeal also looked at new scientific evidence that suggested that the blood could have got onto his clothes as he bent down to check her breathing or hold her. The defense turned to Professor David Dennison, who was a leading expert in lung disease. He found what he said was evidence of PIE or pulmonary interstitial emphysema, a rare condition. He said that there had been a buildup of pressure in her lungs in the minutes leading up to the murder. He believed that the cause of this was blood blocking her airway, and some of this was released when Sean moved her, thus the blood spots spraying onto him. My experiments show that you can generate from the mouth and nose the sort of spatters that were found on Sean Jenkins' clothing, and the distribution is almost identical. The size of the droplets is almost identical. So it is a very, very credible explanation, Professor Dennison said. On the back of this evidence, on the 16th of June, 3 Court of Appeal judges quashed Sean Jenkins' original conviction, deemed it unsafe, and ordered a retrial. He was released on bail with the conditions that he live with his father in Wales and not leave a 10-mile zone unless it was to visit his lawyers or go to court. While he waited to go on trial again in February 2005, Sean remarried. A woman called Christina had written him a letter of support in July 2004 and a relationship later formed. In April 2005, the retrial began at the Old Bailey. Prosecutor Nicholas Hilliard said that the prosecution didn't believe the account Sean had given about finding Billy Joe. Sean had allegedly said to the police that when he found her with lots of blood around her head, he knew what happened wasn't an accident. He said he felt uneasy to let them, his 2 daughters, out of my sight and went into the hall to call an ambulance. The prosecutor said, "We do not accept he was giving a truthful account. He was trying to avoid doing anything to help her. The prosecution also said that the night before, Lois and Sean had gotten into an argument about Billy Joe, a child that Sean would describe to the police as difficult. Lois appeared at the retrial via a video link. She cried as she said that one of their daughters had said that Sean kept going over her story with her as she was trying to read a book. She cried and said, "I feel I'm breaching the confidence of my children." She added that all the girls had moments when they opened up and spoke about the whole story before closing up again. She explained that following the press conference, she began to suspect him. A statement that she had made in July 2003 to the police was read out, and it said the following: 3 or 4 days following the murder and in the middle of the night, it began to dawn on me that Sean was, quite possibly, responsible for the murder. I think these thoughts may have resulted from the way Sean handled the press conference during the day. I cannot remember the press conference. Following this, I have become completely paranoid about my thoughts and the implications on the girls and I. Lois said that Sean had applied for the role of head teacher, and whilst he had been told he had secured the post, he was still waiting for written confirmation as they were checking his references. Knowing that he had lied on his CV and exaggerated his qualifications and lied about where he had got them from was making him incredibly anxious. The night before the murder, she said that Sean was pacing up and down in the lounge really fast and said that he appeared to be on edge. One of the people to testify at the retrial was Denise Lancaster, the friend that Sean had called to help Billy Joe. She said, "I could see Billy lying down on the floor with her head to one side, and her hand was up near her face. The rest of her body was flat to the ground. Her legs were together in a very strange position, I felt. She looked as if she was asleep. I bent down and touched her hand and touched her cheek. I had an overwhelming sense of it not being something I could do, to put her in a recovery position, which had been my general idea. She seemed too injured for me to really touch." After telling Sean to ring for an ambulance and getting a towel for Billy Joe's wounds, she returned to the patio. I looked more closely and saw her head was completely shattered. It was devastating. The only thing moving was the blood flowing from her nose. It was a slow trickle. The right side of her face was remarkably undamaged. Denise told the court that Sean had been wearing the blue fleece that day, and that he had later left it at her house when the family had gone over. I picked up the fleece and Lois said to Sean, "Your coat." He said he didn't want it, and she said, "It's freezing out there. Take your coat." Denise then said she had been with Lois when the police told her about the blood spots on his clothes. She said to me, "Why did Sean kill Billy? If he was ever going to kill anyone, I am sure he would kill me." One issue that needed to be addressed was motive. During his cross-examination, it was put forward that he had killed her after she had failed to turn the music down. "You attacked her in a terrible temper in a matter of seconds," the prosecutor said. "No, I didn't attack Billy. I didn't pick up the tent peg. There was no argument whatsoever. When you left Billy, she was almost dead, wasn't she?" "No, Billy was not dead. Billy was alive and Billy was well." The court heard that Sean had what was called a peculiar look on his face as he rushed down the steps of the house and told Charlotte and Annie to get into the car. As part of the proceedings, the jury visited the house on Lower Park Road and then did the route that Sean drove that day to the DIY shop, the route that looped around the park, the route that seemed needlessly long. Throughout the retrial, the forensic evidence that had been presented during Sean's first trial was heavily scrutinized. Experts in forensics told the court that it was possible for the blood spots to get onto his clothes, as he held her while she lay dying. A key witness at the retrial, Robert Schroeder, an emeritus professor at Imperial College London, would talk about the traces of other things in the blood spatter, like metal and bone. He said, "Whatever blood came out of Billy Joe's mouth would have been contaminated, so to find microscopic traces of paint or bone or metal does not change anything. The paint and metal could have come in blood running down her head into her mouth. The truth is that the scientific evidence is minimal, and the idea that Mr. Jenkins could have done what was alleged in the time he had and then gone straight out with his daughters in the car is hard to believe." The retrial would last for 3 months, and it was soon time for the jury to deliberate. Media interest was at a fever pitch. Then came the breaking news. They had failed to reach a verdict. They were discharged and a second retrial was ordered. Before the second retrial, Dr. Skepper, who had examined the blood spots during the first trial, said that fragments of metal, paint, and bone could also be present in the blood spots, but the judge ruled it inadmissible as it was submitted too late. A senior prosecution source said, "This evidence about the bone in the blood was completely new, and we are extremely disappointed that it did not go before the jury." When preparing for the second retrial, something new and very interesting would come out. Sean Jenkins had said that he had seen a man dressed smartly in the hallway of the family home when the ambulance arrived. It was someone he assumed was a police officer. He said, "I have stood face to face with him. I have spoken with him. I know what he looks like and I remember his mannerisms. He wore a dark navy or possibly dark olive overcoat and was smartly dressed. I could see he was wearing a tie. He had highly polished shoes. It was this fact that reassured me he was a police officer." The man was standing in the hall. I turned around and looked at him. He said, "She's going to be okay," then left me staring at the door to the dining room. I honestly believe this man is responsible for my daughter's murder. I believe he killed her in cold blood for reasons that I can only speculate and surmise. He said that he believed this man had been hiding in the dining room before coming out into the hallway. Denise Lancaster, who went round after Sean called for her help, said that she thought this mystery man was a fiction. When asked in an interview why this hadn't been mentioned before, he said, "I did mention him in my original witness statement. For years, the police didn't challenge this idea that this man was a police officer. And for years, Sean said he believed this to be true." In 2005, when preparing for his second trial, Sean asked the CPS for the statements of all of the officers who had been to the house that day. There was only one that could not be accounted for, the man from the hallway. In spite of this new development, the second retrial of Sean Jenkins began on the 31st of October 2005. The prosecution laid out their case again. They said that the person who had murdered Billy Joe Jenkins was not the mystery man in the hallway. They said it was Sean. It does not take a moment to hit someone with an iron bar and not many more to hit them several forceful blows. If she did not die instantly, she could not have lived more than a few minutes. "It's a mercy she was unconscious," the prosecution said. He added that Sean's story had been inconsistent as to whether or not he had actually gone into the house before going to the DIY store or not. During these proceedings, Sean admitted to being physical with Billy Joe, slapping her in the face on one occasion. He said, "I heard a noise upstairs, so I went up and Billy was pulling heads off dolls." His daughter Esther was upset and asked her to stop, and Billy Joe swore at her and pulled her hair. "I prized one of Billy's hands off Esther's hair and then slapped her face," adding that it wasn't hard, but he did regret it. He described the second occasion as being when Lois was talking to Billy Joe and Billy Joe refused to look at her. He said, "I turned Billy's face gently towards Lois and said, 'Look at your mother.'" He denied that he had kicked Billy Joe's sprained ankle during a holiday in France in the year before her murder, but a family friend, Peter Gamster, told the court that Sean definitely did. He said that he had been annoyed that she had hurt herself, allegedly saying to her, "You were always hurting yourself when I go away every time there is something wrong." Peter added, "There is no such thing as a playful kick. It was a proper, aggressive kick. He was furious. He was angry." Videos of interviews of Billy Joe's friends taken shortly after her murder were played to the court, where they said that Billy Joe had told them that Sean had been violent towards her. One of her friends, Laura, said that Billy Joe had come into school with blood on her face, saying she got punched in her nose by her dad. There was blood on her shirt and blood around her mouth. She said on a separate occasion that Billy Joe had bruises on her arms and legs and reportedly said, "You can guess what happened." Her friend Holly spoke of another occasion in which Billy Joe had told Sean to leave their dog Buster alone. She said he pinned her up against the door and scratched her face. She said Sean just lost his temper. Her friends said that Billy Joe had been worried that if she made a complaint, her foster parents would lose their jobs. The shocking allegations did not stop there. It was stated that Lois had told police back then that one of their daughters felt Sean preferred Billy Joe to her and that Billy Joe, quote, flirted with him. Lois would later say, "I don't recall her saying it in that situation, but there was a whole guilty thing and that was a part of it. But I don't recall her telling me that specifically." The The prosecution characterized Sean Jenkins as a bully, someone who lied repeatedly and murdered Billy Joe in a fit of rage. The defense hit back and said that Sean was a caring man, who was the victim of poor forensic evidence and very bad luck. After deliberating for 39 hours over 8 days, the jury, once again, failed to reach a verdict. The prosecution agreed that it would not call for a third retrial, and the judge recorded the verdict as not guilty on the February 9, 2006. Sean Jenkins was formally acquitted of murder. Lois' testimony about domestic abuse was only revealed after his acquittal and a court order was lifted. This testimony was not presented to any of the 3 juries, from his first trial and his 2 retrials, in spite of changes being made to the law in 2003 to allow the admission of evidence of a defendant's character to be presented. Lois had also made a claim that Sean had had a sexual relationship with a teenage girl who allegedly bore a striking resemblance to Billy Joe. This was ruled as inadmissible. Even though Billy Joe's biological father Bill was battling throat cancer, he had attended all the proceedings, and after Sean was formally acquitted, he spoke on radio and said that the allegations of domestic abuse against Sean should have been heard. He said, "I do feel regrets. I should have been a better father. Obviously, I'm not proud of the things I've done in my past. I feel if I'd been a better father, then perhaps Billy Joe may still be alive today. But I'm not holding myself to what happened to my daughter. There's only one person I hold responsible." Sadly, Bill would pass away a few months later. Sean Jenkins was now a free man. As he sat outside court following his acquittal, 2 women came up to him and began punching him and kicking him, later revealed to be Billy Joe's aunts. One of them said they would launch a civil case against Sean, as the judge had refused to allow the scientific evidence that the blood spots on his clothes contained fragments of Billy Joe's bone. She said, "We will see him again in court. This is not the end." Outside the Old Bailey stood Sean Jenkins. Billy Joe's murderer has escaped detection because of the dreadful errors in the police investigation and their single-minded and desperate determination to convict me at all costs. The police who have been in charge of the inquiry have been willfully blind and incompetent. The investigation was enormous, with many lines of inquiry and 700 statements being taken by the police. Across the 3 trials of Sean Jenkins, the jury spent 36 days deliberating, and it was now all over. Assistant Chief Constable Jeff Williams said Sussex Police would now take time to reflect on today's outcome. "Throughout this long and detailed investigation, we have resolutely pursued our aim, which is to seek justice for Billy Joe. The role of the police is to investigate crime, and that is what Sussex Police have done. This remains an unsolved murder case. It will, as a matter of course, be subject to review, which we will conduct with an open mind. She was brutally murdered on the patio of her foster parents' home, a place where she ought to have been safe." Following his acquittal, Sean was interviewed by journalist Trevor McDonald as part of a special report called Billy Joe and Me. The interview covered a wide range of topics, including why had he lied on his CV and exaggerated his qualifications. He said it was simply because he'd wanted a better job and had been struggling to pay the mortgage, so wanted a job with a better salary. He explained the reasons why he had driven that particular route to the DIY shop was because it was not safe for him to turn around in the street. And shortly after setting off, he decided to go back home. But when one of his daughters expressed disappointment at not being able to paint, he drove off again to the DIY shop. He talked about the allegations that had been made by Lois. He denied being abusive and emphatically stated he had never beaten his wife. He said that Lois was vulnerable, didn't know what she was doing, and was persuaded by the police that he had killed Billy Joe. He also denied being violent with his children. Following the interview, 2 of his daughters said in a statement, "The comments made by our father, where he denied using corporal punishment against us, are not true." Following his experiences, Sean pursued a master's in criminology and criminal justice and a master's in social research and methodology. He said, "I'm in my final year of my doctorate, and I'm enjoying understanding more and more about my case and what happened to me. I want to be able to use what I have learned to help other people who go through the miscarriage of justice experience." He also published a book called The Murder of Billy Joe, in which he talks about the case and his life. In the book, he spoke about this mystery man that he said he saw in the house and mistook for a police officer. And after it was published, a former neighbor said that she had remembered a report in a local newspaper that referred to a passing motorist who had seen an unidentified man coming out of the house that day. But this, like all of the lines of inquiry, has seemingly gone nowhere. Sean later said that since his arrest he had seen his daughters for a total of 2 hours, whilst he was in prison in 1998 and had not seen them since, but said he hopes to reunite with them one day. He sought damages following his conviction being quashed for both wrongful arrest and imprisonment. This was denied, and a spokesperson for the Ministry of Justice said, following his acquittal, one person whose testimony had not been heard came forward and gave an interview. Lois Jenkins. Lois said that Sean was a physically abusive liar. I can recall with clarity the look in his eyes as he told the children, "Billy's dead." It had no trace of emotion. I woke up in the middle of the night as he turned over in bed, and it dawned on me, it could have been him. I lay there terrified, thinking it must be him. And if it wasn't him, at least it could have been him. She added that in the days that followed, it was as if Sean wasn't there. He offered no comfort. I felt let down and also faintly embarrassed. I wondered if our friends had noticed his detachment. Lois said that she had left the UK as a result of her foster daughter's murder, and her faith in the justice system had been tested. She said that her self-confidence had been destroyed and that she felt guilty. When speaking about Billie Joe, she said, "I grew to love her and regard her as my own daughter. She had a good rapport with Sean, and I truly believe that she was happy with her new family." As the 20th anniversary of her death was approaching, her biological mother Deborah said it would be great if they could open the investigation again and get some fresh eyes on it. The police have nothing to lose and everything to gain. I can't describe it to you. Unless you have lost a child, it's a nightmare. I want to get justice for her. But sadly, Deborah would not see justice for Billie Joe, as she would pass away in 2018. When looking at other lines of inquiry, her family called for the police to reopen the case and look at the possibility of her murderer being a man called Anthony Amila, dubbed the M25 rapist. Anthony Amila was given 7 life sentences for a series of brutal sexual assaults around the M25 area. At the time of the murder, he was living in the same area as Billie Joe. Her aunt said that he fit the description of the man who was allegedly stalking her in the months leading up to her death. She said the investigation needs to be reopened for Billie Joe's sake. The police must find out what Amila was doing on the day she was murdered. Somebody murdered Billie Joe, and we've got to find out who it was. The police need to investigate all avenues. Amila could have done it, and the fact is we don't know and need to know. Was he in Hastings that day? He was also reportedly obsessed with girls that were her age and would use improvised weapons in his attacks. Anthony Amila died in prison on the 8th of March 2018. There are no reports of him being named as a suspect in her death, nor of him ever being investigated for it. The murder of Billie Joe Jenkins is one of the most notorious unsolved crimes in Britain. Her case has been the subject of much rumor, speculation, and gossip. It's been covered in books, documentaries, and on television shows. But we are still no closer to getting justice for her. Without a doubt, it is an incredibly complex investigation, both scientifically and otherwise. And there are still so many unanswered questions. For those left behind, the pain is still raw all of these years later. For Billie Joe's best friend Holly, losing Billie Joe still haunts her. I was in total shock. I was in counseling for ages. It was such a dreadful thing to happen. She was my best friend. We did everything together. We were inseparable. I wish I could have seen Billie Joe get married and have kids. She's missed out on all that. It's so sad. A memorial for Billie Joe Jenkins was unveiled in Alexandra Park, a wooden bench designed to be a spot for teenagers to spend time together. It was removed in 2024 due to the wood starting to rot, so hopefully it will soon be back in the park. Detective Inspector Kevin Moore said, "We owe it to Billie Joe to keep the case in the public's mind and not give up. Her case will be reviewed every 2 years in the hopes of uncovering something new. She was someone who had everything to live for. She was bright, she was funny, she was articulate, and she was someone who without a doubt would have taken on everything that life had to offer her. But due to the violence inflicted upon her on that sunny Saturday afternoon, she will be forever 13. If you have any information relating to the murder of Billy Joe Jenkins, please contact Sussex Police on 101 and quote, Operation Cathedral. Decades may pass and many cases may grow cold, but occasionally some are brought back into the light. Today's story is no exception. It is a tale of unexpected resolution after nearly 25 years of stagnation. This particular case revolves around Mandy Steingasser, a vibrant and sociable individual who cherished her outdoor adventures with her father. Together, they embarked on camping trips and road journeys, as Mandy fearlessly embraced her adventurous spirit. On one occasion, she even encountered a ground squirrel, cradling it in her arms with affection. Unfortunately, the squirrel bit her, but such encounters were not uncommon for Mandy, who possessed a penchant for interacting with various creatures during her camping escapades. Her personality was enigmatic, and she often associated with individuals who carried an air of danger. When questioned about her choice of friends, she simply stated that she did not pass judgment on them. In the autumn of 1993, Mandy, a 17-year-old senior at North Tonawanda High School near Buffalo, New York, found herself at a crossroads. Although academically gifted, she had yet to solidify her career plans and subsequently enrolled at Niagara County Community College after graduation. Mandy exuded boundless energy and reveled in the thrill of parties and experimenting with alcohol. At times, her enthusiasm for such activities caused her to lose track of time, occasionally forgetting to return home. To ensure her safety, her parents established a set of rules for her evening outings. She was expected to adhere to a specific curfew and, if unable to do so, she was required to inform her parents or make her way home as swiftly as possible. On the 18th of September 1993, a Saturday night, Mandy ventured out with her friends, Stacy, her boyfriend Brian, and Brian's acquaintance, Wayne. Stacy and Mandy had arranged a sleepover at the Steingassers' residence, with the understanding that they would return home by midnight. Both Mandy and Stacy were 17, while Brian and Wayne were a few years older. Wayne possessed his own apartment, making it convenient for them to procure alcohol. That evening, the group decided to visit a liquor store to purchase whiskey and rum, before embarking on a journey from North Tonawanda to Buffalo in Wayne's car. Their intention was to attend a rock concert at a local bar, but unfortunately, the girls were denied entry due to their age by the bouncer. Brian and Wayne, being considerate, chose to stay with them as both girls were somewhat intoxicated. It was quite out of character for Mandy not to inform her parents about her whereabouts, especially since she had a curfew. After a short while, a car filled with men approached the group, accusing Brian and Wayne of harassing one of their neighbors. This led to a brief altercation which frightened both Mandy and Stacy, causing them to flee in different directions. Shortly after, the sound of police sirens could be heard, prompting the men to hastily depart. Brian and Wayne desperately called out to the girls to return, but Mandy had vanished. She had fled out of fear that if the police found her, they would escort her back home, thus ruining her plan to sneak in without her parents' knowledge of her missed curfew. Mandy began her journey on foot towards her house, which was over a mile away. She headed north on Oliver Street until she reached a convenience store at the intersection of Fifth Avenue. It was there that a car pulled up beside her, and she leaned into the passenger seat before entering the vehicle. The driver was an acquaintance from her school who kindly offered to drive her home between 1:10 and 1:30 a.m. on September 19th. Regrettably, this marked the last time Mandy was seen alive. At 2:30 a.m., Stacy called Mandy's mother Lorraine, inquiring whether Mandy had returned home. Lorraine became furious upon realizing that her daughter had not only missed curfew, but also failed to come home. Throughout the night, her parents anxiously awaited Mandy's arrival. She never appeared. The following morning, they began reaching out to all of her friends. Fortunately, Mandy had a friend whose father was a police officer, and he promptly visited the Steingassers' residence. The commencement of the investigation unfolded, and the authorities proclaimed that she may have absconded, although Mandy's parents vehemently dismissed this notion as they possessed an intimate understanding of their daughter's character. Whispers began to circulate, insinuating that she had ventured southward to Florida alongside her lover who had recently relocated there. However, on the 25th day of October in the year 1993, a fortnight following Mandy's inexplicable disappearance, two individuals engaged in a mushroom hunt stumbled upon a ghastly sight within the confines of Bond Lake Park. There, nestled upon the banks of Myers Lake, lay a set of severely decomposed human remains. It appeared as though an attempt had been made to submerge the lifeless body into the depths of the lake, only to be thwarted by the entanglement of foliage. Subsequent investigations confirmed the identity of the remains as belonging to Mandy. The forensic examination divulged a harrowing truth. She had met her demise through strangulation, her bra serving as the instrument of her demise. Furthermore, the report revealed the presence of 2 brain hemorrhages and a fracture near her frontal temple. The authorities' suspicions turned towards a fellow student from Mandy's school, the last person seen with her. Although the police publicly acknowledged the existence of a suspect, they refrained from disclosing his identity due to the dearth of evidence that would substantiate his culpability. Mandy Steingasser, a tender 17 years of age, was last sighted on the 19th day of September in the year 1993, approximately 1:30 in the morning, at the intersection of 5th Avenue and Oliver Street within the city of North Tonawanda. Her lifeless body was discovered on the 25th day of October in the same year, within the confines of Bond Lake Park. The absence of substantial evidence caused this case to languish in obscurity for a quarter of a century, until the advent of new technological advancements that facilitated the examination of the culprit's DNA, which was found upon Mandy's remains. Finally, when the truth was unveiled, a plethora of evidence was amassed, paving the way for the district attorney to present a compelling case before the grand jury. On the 24th day of April in the year 2018, Joseph Bellstadt was apprehended at his abode, mere moments after returning from his place of employment. It was his 43rd birthday, and he found himself facing a second-degree murder charge. Bellstadt maintained that on September 19, 1993, he had indeed given Mandy a ride, but he insisted that he dropped her off in front of a church before stopping at a donut shop and returning home. However, witnesses contradicted his statement, claiming they saw Bellstadt picking up Mandy and then coming back. Furthermore, his friends revealed that he had asked them to provide false testimony in his favor. Despite Bellstadt's denial of these allegations, he was compelled to undergo a lie detector test. During the first attempt, he stormed out of the room due to the questioning's tone, but during the second test, his lies were exposed, confirming him as a liar. Another witness stepped forward, stating that Bellstadt had taken her to a secluded location weeks before Mandy's murder, shedding light on his possible motives. When investigators searched Bellstadt's car, they discovered 2 strands of pubic hair in the back seat, which they were unable to test in 1993. However, with the advancements in technology by 2018, the hair was confirmed to belong to Mandy. It was then established that Bellstadt had attempted to sexually assault her before becoming enraged and strangling her to death with her own bra. Finally, on March 9, 2020, his trial commenced and the defense argued that he was being unjustly convicted without substantial evidence. Nevertheless, the jury presented numerous witnesses who testified about Bellstadt's behavior following Mandy's disappearance. They revealed that he had stopped attending school, to which Bellstadt claimed he had planned a trip to Canada that was ultimately canceled due to unforeseen circumstances. However, all of these statements were proven to be lies, leading to his conviction for the murder of Mandy Steingasser. On January 14th, he received a 25-year prison sentence, despite his desperate attempts to maintain his innocence. "But I am not the person who killed Mandy. I am innocent," he maintained. On that fateful night of November 28, 1984, Gary Corrigan's life took a dark turn. After bidding farewell to the Night Spot Lounge in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, he vanished without a trace. The last person seen with him was Layla Erica Mahler, a young exotic dancer at the time. It was a puzzling disappearance, made even more suspicious by the discovery of his abandoned pink Cadillac in Metairie, Louisiana. Inside the trunk, a chilling sight awaited investigators, pools of blood hinting at a sinister fate. But let's not reduce Gary Corrigan to just a name in a cold case file. Born on May 1, 1950, he was a man of substance. With his brown hair, captivating eyes, and a commanding presence at 5 feet 11 inches tall and 170 pounds. He left an impression wherever he went. His story was intertwined with that of his family, particularly his brother, Ted Corgon. Their bond went beyond mere siblinghood. They were partners in life and business. After their father's untimely passing, Gary stepped up as a father figure for Ted. This deep connection carried them through life, and they eventually became business partners in the fast food industry. Together, they embarked on a groundbreaking deal with Sonic to open multiple outlets in the New Orleans area, a bold move that showcased their entrepreneurial spirit. Gary's personal life was equally fulfilling. He was a devoted husband to Susie and a loving father to their son Wade. Family meant everything to him, and he cherished his time at home. Ted, on the other hand, remained single, but their close-knit family dynamic remained unshaken. Their business circle expanded when Larry Tucker, another Sonic Drive-In owner, and his daughter, Memory, joined forces with the Corgons. They were all set to expand their Sonic empire into Baton Rouge, which led them to rent an apartment there for convenience. However, fate had a different plan for them. They ended up becoming roommates at Gary's place. Gary Corgon was a man of ambition and accomplishment, and he never hesitated to indulge in the luxuries that his success brought him. On that fateful night of November 28, 1984, a phone call sparked excitement in the Corgon household. Gary had just sealed a deal in Mississippi that promised a remarkable expansion for their restaurant business, marking a significant milestone. Overflowing with joy, he couldn't wait to share the news with his brother and business partner, Ted. Gary was so eager to celebrate their triumph that he planned to head straight to Ted's house. Little did they know, the night would take an unexpected turn. Gary never arrived at Ted's place. As the hours ticked by, what was meant to be a night of jubilation turned into worry. Ted, who had dozed off while waiting, woke up to the realization that Gary hadn't shown up, an unusual occurrence considering Gary's reliability and their plans. The unease wasn't limited to Ted alone. Susie, Gary's wife, was overwhelmed with a gut feeling that something was terribly wrong. In a desperate attempt to trace Gary's whereabouts, Ted reached out to Larry and all the restaurant locations, hoping for any clue about Gary's presence or activities that night. After all, Gary had mentioned his intention to visit Ted to Larry, a man known for his dependability. The situation quickly escalated from confusion to a state of emergency, engulfing everyone close to Gary in a whirlwind of shock and disbelief. Larry, who had shared countless professional and personal moments with Gary, felt particularly shaken, describing the experience as a sudden disruption to their normal lives. Ted, now a man on a mission, tirelessly searched every nook and cranny of Baton Rouge where Gary might have gone. He scoured stores, eateries, and any place that Gary frequented, driven by the unsettling feeling that his brother had vanished without a trace. Ted, clinging to a glimmer of hope that the situation was a mere accident or misdirection, couldn't shake off the feeling of impending doom. He was well-versed in the local terrain, understanding the risks of getting lost or encountering danger, especially in the desolate swamps of Louisiana. As both Ted and Gary were familiar faces in law enforcement, serving as commission deputies, Ted had a unique advantage with his connections and insights during the search. A breakthrough in the investigation came when a piece of paper with the name Erica was found. This crucial clue emerged in the Baton Rouge apartment shared by Gary and his business partner, Larry Tucker. Initially dismissed by Larry as insignificant, the note later proved to be a vital link to Gary's disappearance. The revelation hinted at a hidden aspect of Gary's life, hinting at a potential involvement with another woman unbeknownst to his loved ones. Motivated by this discovery, Ted's pursuit led him to a nightclub called the Hot Pot, where a case of mistaken identity unraveled. This encounter ultimately led Ted to the realization that Gary had been spotted with a dancer named Erica, who was now at the center of his frantic search. As the police pieced together the puzzle, they unraveled a shocking truth. Erica was actually Layla Muller, a 19-year-old exotic dancer who lived with her boyfriend, Ronald Dunnigan. The urgency of the situation skyrocketed, prompting law enforcement to delve into their residence. Fueled by a mix of hope and dread, Ted insisted on being part of the operation, desperately clinging to the slim chance of finding Gary alive, even if he was in distress. However, the scene at the duplex shattered any glimmer of hope. The sight of blood and the violently damaged interiors sent chills down their spines. Ted recounted the horrifying details. Blood was splattered everywhere. The walls looked like they had been mercilessly beaten with a hammer. And in that moment, I knew deep down that Gary would never return. This gruesome discovery marked a significant and grim turning point in the search for Gary, shifting the narrative from a search and rescue mission to the horrifying possibility of a heinous crime. Finally, a breakthrough came when Gary's abandoned car was found in a business parking lot, its interior stained with blood. Ted couldn't shake off the haunting words of the crime investigator. The crime investigator said, "What you're looking at is someone died in the trunk of that car." Glimmer of hope that Gary's wife, Susie, and their community held onto was shattered when they discovered that Gary's brand new Cadillac had been untouched for 5 days. As devout members of the Latter-day Saints, they turned to their church for comfort and support during this dark time. The harsh reality of Gary's fate became undeniable, leaving a bitter taste in everyone's mouth. Ted, the bearer of bad news, had to deliver the devastating truth to the family, extinguishing any remaining hope of Gary's return. The investigation took a sharp turn as all eyes focused on Layla Muller, the last person known to have seen Gary. Muller and her boyfriend, Ronald Dunnigan, quickly became the prime suspects, especially after blood was found in Gary's car and in Muller's home that she shared with Dunnigan. The couple's sudden disappearance only fueled suspicions, leading law enforcement on a high-stakes chase from Baton Rouge to Las Vegas. In an unexpected twist, Muller's attempt to blend into the bustling city of Las Vegas by acquiring an escort license led to her detention by local police, thanks to a warrant from Baton Rouge labeling her as a material witness. Meanwhile, Dunnigan, pretending to wait for Muller near the sheriff's station, was also detained due to an unrelated bench warrant for a traffic violation. Ted, determined to crack the case wide open, swiftly arranged for detectives to be flown to Las Vegas on a private jet, navigating through legal loopholes and jurisdictional challenges. Under the intense pressure of interrogation, Muller implicated Dunnigan in Gary's death, suggesting it was an accident, but acknowledging that Gary did not deserve to die. This revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation, but it was the discovery of Muller's diary that truly turned the tide. Ted stumbled upon the chilling entries in the couple's Las Vegas apartment, revealing sinister plans to assault Gary. With this damning evidence, along with the physical clues and Muller's testimony, the case against the couple seemed to solidify, bringing them one step closer to justice. However, the situation took a turn for the worse when a new district attorney, Brian Bush, made the decision to release Dunnigan and Muller due to the absence of a physical body. The difficulties in prosecuting a murder case without one. This move, influenced by the limitations of forensic technology at the time and Muller's legal tactics, left the Corgon family and the prosecution team shocked and disheartened. Gary's body was never recovered and he was declared legally deceased in 1986. The Corgon case eventually went cold. Layla Muller, also known as Erica in the past, had a life that seemed like a contradictory story. At the age of 19, she had an impressive CV as an honor student, a talented violinist, and a track star in her home state of Ohio. Despite her affluent background, Layla's life took a sharp turn as she battled substance abuse and embraced a rebellious wild persona, leading her to escape from a rehabilitation center and seek refuge in Louisiana. In this new phase of her life, Layla chose paths far removed from her previous accomplishments, working as a stripper and a prostitute. Her living conditions reflected her tumultuous life, sharing a rundown duplex with Ronald Dunnigan, her much older boyfriend who lived a life filled with eccentricity and challenges. Ronald, who made a modest income as a part-time street performer, was a stark contrast to Layla's youth and beauty. Despite his lack of financial stability and education, Ronald held a dominant role in their relationship, serving as the protector that Layla craved in her chaotic world. Their unconventional bond was built on mutual dependence. Layla's nighttime activities funded their lifestyle while Ron provided a sense of security, albeit in a twisted and dysfunctional manner. Gary Corgon, a regular client of Layla's, unwittingly got caught up in this volatile relationship. Layla Muller and Ronald Dunnigan managed to evade capture for 3 decades. Their lives continued as if the past had never happened. However, the tides shifted with advancements in DNA testing and a reinvigorated cold case unit in Baton Rouge, determined to solve long-standing mysteries. Memory Tucker, connected to the case through her father, Larry Tucker, played a crucial role in reopening the investigation. Now working as a district attorney investigator, she launched a comprehensive review of the case, diligently tracking down old witnesses and utilizing modern forensic science. The confirmation of Gary's blood in the abandoned Cadillac's trunk through a DNA sample from his son Wade solidified the groundwork for a renewed prosecution effort. Ted Corgon, who had tirelessly pursued Dunnigan and Muller over the years, knew exactly where to locate them. Muller had started a new life as a nurse in New York, while Dunnigan, still obsessed with Muller, lived off a fraudulent disability claim in Louisiana. When the authorities finally made their move, Ted was there undercover, witnessing the arrest unfold. Muller's arrest and subsequent interrogation peeled away the layers of manipulation and fear that had characterized her relationship with Dunnigan. She portrayed herself as a victim of Dunnigan's threats, implicating him as the mastermind behind Gary Corgon's murder. Dunnigan's peculiar control extended to psychological manipulation, creating an ever-present watcher named Squeaky to keep Muller in check. Her diary entries, intertwined with this delusion, provided bone-chilling insights into their twisted relationship and sinister activities. During her confession, Muller divulged the gruesome details of the crime. According to her, Dunnigan had poisoned Gary, then methodically dismembered his body to dispose of it in a calculated and cold-hearted manner. Despite her initial reluctance to testify, the weight of the evidence and her own admissions during interrogation painted a horrifying picture of the murder. Armed with Mueller's testimony and the amassed evidence, prosecutors finally had the necessary leverage to ensure justice is served. The Mueller case reached a turning point on May 15, 2014, when she accepted a plea deal resulting in a 30-year sentence, while Dunnigan was sentenced to life. The Gary Corgon murder saga spanning 3 decades finally saw a semblance of closure, bringing a mix of relief and sadness to his family. Wade Corgon, Gary's son, expressed his feelings, stating, "It's a great relief to finally have some closure and justice served." Dana Cummings, Assistant District Attorney for East Baton Rouge Parish, praised Ted's unwavering determination in seeking the truth and ensuring justice prevailed. This recognition highlights the significant impact of individual perseverance in navigating the legal system. Ted Corgon's response to the case's conclusion was one of pure relief and triumph. His words, "After 30 years I finally got you, you son of a gun," captured the depth of his long-standing frustrations and the satisfaction of seeing justice served. Ted also added, "I've been angry for 3 decades now, and it hurts that she took my best friend away from me." Yet, for Ted, the story doesn't conclude with Muller and Dunnigan's sentencing. He remains dedicated to locating his brother's remains, a journey that signifies not only a search for closure, but also an emotional path towards peace and resolution. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.